Have you ever seen those tourist photos where someone pretends to hold up the Leaning Tower of Pisa? The person's close up to the camera and the tower is far in the background, but the two appear to be touching. That's an example of forced perspective. It's a basic optical trick that changes how we perceive scale and distance. Theme parks use that same technique and many others like it to alter how we see buildings, landscapes and attractions. These tricks make structures look taller, they make paths look longer, and they make environments feel more expansive than they actually are. What I want to do today is talk a little bit about forced perspective and its utilisation in theme parks. So what the benefits are to adapting forced perspective techniques to theme park infrastructure. I also want to talk a little bit about what that does to our experiences in the theme parks, and I'm going to touch upon some of my favourite examples of forced perspective in the theme parks that I've visited. So firstly, why do theme parks manipulate scale? I mean, theme parks are constrained by land availability, budget, local zoning codes, safety requirements and operational needs. And within those boundaries, they're expected to deliver immersive environments that appear vast, detailed and continuous. Manipulating scale is a practical response to this challenge. And there's four main categories that drive the reasons behind wanting to change the perspective within a theme park. The first is from a storytelling and visual perspective. So themed environments, they're constructed to support narrative cues. Structures like the castles, temples, towers and mountains are used as visual anchors. So these elements give guests a point of orientation and help organise the spatial logic of a land. However, building these icons at full scale is often not feasible. So designers, they use visual tricks to preserve the impression of grandeur without constructing sort of the unnecessary volume. The second motive really is about the efficiency of land use. So theme parks operate within a really fixed footprint, and every square foot must balance the aesthetic impact with the utility of the space. So how guests circulate that space, the queue space, the ride infrastructure and all of the support systems that you don't see behind the scenes. So a structure that appears tall and complex on the outside might be backed by a simplified or smaller framework, and by adjusting the scale strategically, designers maintain the illusion of scale while minimising that land usage and the materials that they'd need to build it with. Another motive for manipulating that perspective is about guest flow and how you find your way from one land to the next. So icons and scaling tricks are used to guide guests intuitively through space. And the fourth motive really is about concealing infrastructure from sight. So behind every theme land there are elements that aren't meant for our view. So there's ride mechanics, employee access roads, backstage areas, electrical systems and so on. But the strategic use of scaling, the facade layering and sightline design allow these operational features to sit adjacent to guest areas without being noticed. And later on in the video we will touch specifically on sightline and how important that is in designing theme park lands. So let's look a little bit at some classic examples of forced perspective in theme parks. As we've touched on, is a visual technique where objects are designed to decrease in scale the farther they are from the viewer. The goal is to simulate depth, height or distance using altered proportions. And it works because the human visual system interprets the size of objects in relation to their surroundings, so even if the objects themselves are artificially scaled. I know I'm not alone in citing that maybe Main Street USA at Disneyland is possibly the most quintessential example of forced perspective in any theme park. It's one that I've seen during my research numerous other articles cite as a perfect representation really of how forced perspective can be used to better utilise space and create scale. Main Street USA provides a textbook application really of forced perspective. So what it is the ground level storefronts are built at full or effectively full 1-to-1 scale. However, the second and third stories use progressively smaller window heights, decorative elements and roof features. And the scale works out roughly at 5/8 scale for a second floor and then half scale for the third floor. The scaling is subtle enough that the overall architecture appears cohesive, but the result is giving an illusion of a building that's significantly taller than its true dimensions. And if we stay at Disneyland, another classic example is of Sleeping Beauty Castle. That only stands 77 feet tall, but when you're standing in front of it, you could be forgiven for thinking it's double that. Again, its base is scaled normally, but the upper turrets and the balconies shrink incrementally in proportion. At a distance, this creates the perception of a much taller structure. And something else that we might look at in more detail in another video is the use of paint colours to create scale. So what you might notice in some of these images on screen is that further up on the building, a lighter hue of paint is used, and that's to create the element of distance, where things further away don't appear quite as vibrant as things that are closer to you. Cinderella's castle in Florida is taller at 189 feet, but it uses exactly the same techniques. The uppermost sections are significantly compressed in scale, with the windows, the stonework and the trim reduced in size to make the castle appear even more vertical and distant than it is. Another great example in more recent years is Expedition Everest at Animal Kingdom. That mountain is 199 feet tall and is effectively the maximum height allowed without requiring those FAA warning lights. But to extend the illusion, designers and Imagineers use multiple layers of forced perspective. So there's miniature trees planted near the mountain's peak, the rock textures become finer near the top, and aerial perspective effects are simulated again with lighter colour tones. These changes trick the eye into reading the mountain as taller and farther away than it really is. But these are only a few examples, and we will go into more later. But forced perspectives embedded in nearly every theme park land where height, distance or depth must be implied rather than physically used. But I don't want you watching today to think that forced perspective is the only tool in the theme park designer's arsenal of scale manipulation techniques. It's only one part of a broader visual toolkit. Theme park designers regularly employ other strategies to control scale and spatial perception without relying solely on structural mass. One that you'll notice all of the time in a theme park is curved walkways and then obscured sightlines. And we will touch on sightlines specifically a little bit later, but briefly, instead of building wide open plazas with straight lines of sight, many parks use curved or zigzagging paths, and this limits the field of view at any moment, and it allows the environment to be revealed gradually. As a result, a relatively small land can appear to unfold over a much greater distance. And there are many times when you're very close to an adjacent land and you don't even know it's there until you round that corner. Sound design is another really important tool, especially with the use of ambient sound. So background audio loops can often include wind, birds, running water, or mechanical hums that are placed to suggest off-screen activity. These sounds are embedded in specific zones and reinforce the perception that the space extends beyond what's visible. But I want to talk a little bit more about sightlines. And this is really about what you see and what you don't. So sightlines are one of the most carefully engineered components of theme park design. So while guests typically navigate a park on foot, their visual experience really is dictated from a controlled eye level range, generally between 5 and 6 feet. So everything visible from this perspective is subject to scrutiny during the planning phase. The most important sightline principle is thematic containment. So visual elements from one land can't intrude upon another. So for example, seeing a sci-fi building clearly from inside a frontier themed area creates that narrative clash. So designers use elevation, barriers and vegetation to block out of place visuals. So much of a theme park's physical infrastructure is located just beyond the guest areas. So these include ride show buildings, break rooms, warehouses and backstage roads. These are routinely hidden using berms, which is a term you might not hear used regularly, but it's kind of an artificial grass or earth mound, and along with that dense vegetation, often arranged in multiple layers. And then vertical surfaces are sometimes painted in sky tones or camouflaged with scenic elements. Parks then also use transitional spaces such as tunnels, archways or bridges to mediate between thematically distinct lands. You'll notice this most recently in the design of Epic Universe, and how there are these portals, these tunnels between the central land and each themed land that moves away from it. The structures themselves serve as hard visual breaks, but inside the corridors, audio and lighting slowly shift to prepare guests for the change in the visual aesthetic. And where paths open up, visual landmarks such as mountains and castles are placed to draw your sight. Designers review sightlines using scaled models, they use digital simulations, and they also do test walkthroughs long before construction. Even slight visual intrusions are considered problems to be solved. One thing that I want to particularly look at are a number of ride and show buildings that use scale tricks. But before I do, I just want to give a shout out to what I think is the best example of forced perspective in any theme park, and that is Cars Land at Disney's California Adventure Park. This area is unbelievable as an excellently structured example of forced perspective techniques, especially the idea of scale, with the various elements of the rock face getting smaller and smaller as you go up and theoretically further away, and again the idea of more vibrant colours lower down and more muted colours higher up. But not only that, the idea of sightline as well in this land is incredible. Wherever you stand, your inability to see anything outside of Cars Land is really immersive. It's just such an awesome land. And I'm sure people can drop down in the comments and talk all about why Cars Land is so incredible to visit. But to look specifically at facades and building fronts for show buildings, I actually think some overlooked examples are actually at the Universal theme parks, specifically the 2 Harry Potter lands. The facade of Hogwarts Castle is designed to appear massive and detailed, but only a portion of it's actually even structurally complex. The ride for Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey is housed in a large normal rectangular building behind that castle structure. But to disguise all of that volume, the rockwork base rises and flares outward, while the towers near the top of Hogwarts Castle are scaled down progressively, very much like what we talked about with the Disney castles before. But Hogwarts Castle is not the only example of great forced perspective in these Harry Potter lands. Anyone that's been to Gringotts Bank as well at Universal Studios Florida knows what an incredible structure that is. But that bank is just an entry point to a large indoor coaster, and that's just housed in a traditional steel warehouse. So the front of the bank again uses architectural elements like columns and an angled roof line to convey authority and scale. And behind that front facade, scenic walls curve around the show building, which is painted again to blend into the skyline. And another great example moving away from the Universal parks is the Tower of Terror at Disney's Hollywood Studios. Again, that stands at 199 feet tall, much like the mountain at Expedition Everest, but it achieves its visual height through layered architectural detail and forced perspective. The windows and mouldings near the top are scaled down again, and the ride tower is backed by maintenance shafts and show machinery concealed by the building's vertical extension. And at certain angles, even this machinery is masked by scenic side towers and rooftop shapes. So these techniques have persisted across generations of theme park design for a number of technical, financial and operational reasons. One of the biggest is cost reduction. The materials, labour and structural engineering costs would increase massively with the building size. Forced perspective then allows designers to reduce the actual mass of a structure while still delivering that visual effect and making sure that costs don't go too high. As we've touched on before, building height limits, especially near airports or residential zones, really cap how tall structures can legally be. Scaled down architectural elements also require less structural support, so it's simpler for permits and fewer reinforcing systems. And this then translates to shorter construction schedules and reduced maintenance as well. But sightline management and scale control, they allow themed environments to be built adjacent to high capacity infrastructure. So it allows you to build ride systems, cast areas and emergency exit routes without reducing the immersion that the audience really comes for. And it also allows consistency. So to be fair, as the parks expand, you really want those lands to visually transition in an effective way. So designers continue to use sightline and scale tricks to maintain that continuity between additions that have appeared in the park decades apart. But ultimately, the use of these techniques is not about deception. It's about resource management. It's about creative problem solving. And in a way, it's about saving a bit of money as well in a highly constrained environment. Most theme park guests don't think about what they're seeing, but nearly every visual element, from rooftops to rockwork, is engineered to be seen in a specific way. It's been designed for you to consume it in a very specific way, from a specific place, under specific conditions. Forced perspective, controlled sightlines, and colour-based illusions are all part of how theme parks manage that scale. Thanks so much for joining me on this video today. I know it's been slightly different from my deep dives into individual rides and lands, but I find forced perspective so fascinating in theme parks. And I think sometimes you can go through a day in a park without noticing it, and good forced perspective you shouldn't notice, right? If you can walk through a theme park on a day and not realise that you're not looking at full-scale buildings, then it's done its job. It's a bit like CGI in movies. Good CGI is CGI you don't see. But yeah, I find the whole thing fascinating, and the way that buildings can be designed to trick your eyes into thinking that they're taller than they are. Why don't you drop down in the comments and let me know your favourite examples of forced perspective in theme parks. I'd love to hear them, because this could have gone on so much longer. Because there are areas like Pandora that I didn't even touch upon. The waterfalls alone in Pandora are mind-blowing in how they create that perspective. But if you've enjoyed the video, please pop a like on it. It's incredibly helpful to me. And also consider subscribing to the channel as well for more of these theme park deep dives. If this video does well, I'll definitely consider looking more at elements of theme park design in the future. If you watch these videos and you're not already a subscriber, maybe now's the right time. Our community would love to have you here. But most importantly, drop down in the comments and let me know what video you'd like me to do next. Is there a specific attraction you'd like me to do a deep dive into? Drop into the comments and let me know. And if theme park deep dives do interest you, why not check out this video next? Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you all take care. Bye now.